There is a time bomb under Yellowstone National Park and we don't know when it will explode. No, not a bomb in the figurative sense, but an actual bomb. A bomb that contains enough explosive energy to kill millions of people and cause global chaos. But exactly how much danger does this bomb really represent? How likely is it to go off tomorrow or next week? And what would happen if it did? This is what we'll talk about today. Welcome to the channel. First, let's look at the bomb itself. Yellowstone National Park sits on top of a supervolcano. This means that beneath the park, there is magma that from time to time makes its way up through the Earth's crust. The magma forms a magma chamber, and over time it can fill up enough to cause an eruption. It's hard to estimate the volume of the magma chamber because it's not just one big chamber, but rather a network of many chambers. Also, scientists don't agree on where the boundary between the magma chamber and the rest of the mantle is. In 2018, however, researchers came up with a clever way to get an estimate. They used computer models to simulate the movement of seismic waves in the Earth's crust and compared these simulated waves to real seismic waves recorded during earthquakes. By comparing the two sets of data, they could identify areas where the waves differed. These were areas in which the waves had passed through magma. Using this method, they identified a magma reservoir containing 400 to 700 cubic kilometers of magma about 30 kilometers beneath Yellowstone. That's about the size of Manhattan. Unfortunately, this is only a small part of the whole magma chamber system. So if the entire chamber system were to erupt, the amount of magma would be significantly larger. But how big are we talking about? We can get an idea by looking at past eruptions. Yellowstone has had 3 major eruptions in the past 2 million years. These are called the Huckleberry Ridge eruption, the Mesa Falls eruption, and the Lava Creek eruption. They had magnitudes of 8, 8, and 9 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, which is a logarithmic scale. The higher the number, the more violent the eruption. Here are some numbers to put this into perspective. The 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens had a magnitude of 5 on this scale, whereas the 2010 eruption of Eyjafjallajökull had a magnitude of 6. So the Yellowstone eruptions were considerably more energetic. In fact, they are among the largest known eruptions in Earth's history. The largest was the Toba eruption in Indonesia. It had a magnitude of 8 and took place 74,000 years ago. If we assume that the upcoming eruption of the Yellowstone Supervolcano will also have a magnitude of 8, then, according to a study from 2021, the consequences would be devastating. The ash cloud would spread all over North America and reach parts of South America and Western Europe. Cities such as Seattle, Portland, and Salt Lake City would be completely buried under ash. Global temperatures would drop by several degrees for several years, causing crop failures and famine in many parts of the world. Of course, this is just one model among many. For example, another team of researchers looked at the consequences of a magnitude 7 eruption and came to the conclusion that the effects would be regional and not global. Whether the eruption would have a magnitude 7 or 8 depends on the size of the magma chamber that empties during the eruption. Nobody knows how much magma is in the chamber, so nobody knows what the magnitude of the eruption will be. Therefore, it's impossible to say exactly what will happen in the near future. However, scientists do know that it will not happen in the immediate future. The reason for this is that there are instruments called seismometers that measure the strength and occurrence of earthquakes in the area. Earthquakes often precede volcanic eruptions. The more earthquakes, the higher the probability that an eruption is imminent. Currently, the seismicity of the area around Yellowstone is normal. This means that the probability of an imminent eruption is low. However, it would be wrong to say how likely an eruption is. After all, if someone told you that there's a 5 chance that your house will burn down this year, you'd probably say, well, that's quite a high probability. But if their house has been burning down for the last 10 years every single year, then a 5 chance seems like a pretty low probability. In other words, probabilities can be interpreted in many ways. To get a better idea of how likely an eruption is, it helps to look back at previous eruptions. The Huckleberry Ridge eruption had a magnitude of 8, but it didn't happen all at once. It consisted of several phases that took place over 800,000 years. The largest of these phases had a magnitude of 8. So if the next eruption also consists of several phases, it's possible that the worst phase will not come until tens of thousands of years from now. On the other hand, the eruption may take place in a few weeks or months or perhaps even years. In 1985, for example, there was a swarm of earthquakes in the area around Yellowstone. At the time, people thought this might be a sign of an imminent eruption, but nothing happened. In 2018 and 2020, similar swarms of earthquakes occurred again. So far, nothing has happened yet. However, these are only individual cases. We simply don't have enough data to make predictions. All we know is that the older the magma, the less likely it is to erupt. The reason for this is that the deeper the magma sits, the more pressure it experiences from the rest of the rock layers. The higher the pressure, the harder it is for gases dissolved in the magma to escape. And the lower the amount of gas that can escape, the lower the probability that an eruption will occur. But of course, this doesn't mean that old magma can never erupt. It's just unlikely. So what should we do until we know more? For now, scientists urge calm and rational thinking. An eruption would certainly be inconvenient. Much of the western United States would have to be evacuated, and many people would lose their homes and possessions. Crops would fail, and food shortages would occur. In the worst case, some parts of the country would become uninhabitable for a long time. But this would not be the end of the world. Even though an eruption would cause great suffering, we would not go back to the Stone Age. We would not have to flee to caves and learn how to hunt mammoths. There would be no mass extinction. The infrastructure would be damaged, but it could be rebuilt. Yes, the damage would be enormous, but it would not be irreparable. Of course, this is easier said than done. During the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, 57 people lost their lives. Their loved ones would probably have preferred it if the mountain had not erupted at all, even if it meant that a few more people would have starved to death due to crop failures somewhere in Africa. Loss of life due to starvation versus loss of life due to volcanic eruption. Which is worse? Nobody wants to admit that the answer is both. If you think about it, we're lucky that Yellowstone hasn't erupted in the last few thousand years. If it had, we wouldn't have stood a chance, but luckily, it hasn't. Humans are good at adapting to changes, even if those changes are dramatic. Just think about the COVID pandemic. When the virus first hit, it seemed like everything would change forever. 2 years later, most of us went back to our normal lives. It's quite possible that something similar will happen with Yellowstone. We will adapt. We will learn to live with the consequences of the eruption. Maybe it won't even be that bad. But even if it's very bad, we humans are good at getting through tough times. You just have to look at our history. Things have always looked darkest before they turned completely black. Thanks for watching. See you next time.